Okay, let's start this topic. This is CO5 and it is about exception handling.
So the skill is
It's okay, I think. If there would be an issue, then we will see it again. So this topic is exception handling, and what is exception? When you are running your program, if your program during its running, if some event happens or if something happens and your program stops and the control come out of the program and then the control goes to the editor and then you are seeing your source code again, not the running of your program. So that event or that disturbance or that disruption that normally produced is called exception. Is called exception. So exception is basically an event. Exception is what? Exception is an event that disturb or disrupt, the same meaning, that disturb or disrupt the normal flow of your program. After writing the source code, when you hit the run button and when your program is running and you are seeing enter the number or whatever, and you have entered the number and then your program is executing. If something happens in your program, if something, I'm calling that something an event. If that thing happens, if that event happens and your program stops further execution, then this event, which is disrupting the normal flow of your program, is called exception. It's called exception. Basically, in Java, there is this exception is basically a class which is available in Java. And when something happens in your program, the object of that class will be thrown by your program. And the control of your program will go to the editor. So, as I told you, that exception is basically a class available in Java. And when this exception occurs, the object of that class, which is also an exception, will be thrown by your program. For example, anyhow, before moving on, let's see this second point. So this exception basically stops the execution of your program, and then you cannot do that thing which you want from your program, because your program terminates abnormally. So then what is the solution? The solution is to handle that event. The solution is to correct that exception. The solution is to handle that exception, and only then your program will run normally. So that's why there is a topic that is called exception handling. How you can handle those exceptions, which is disrupting your program, which is distracting your program, which is stopping your program. So exception handling is basically a approach, or exception handling is an approach, or you can say it's a mechanism. Basically, its approach is a better word. Exception handling is an approach through which you can manage or you can handle the runtime errors of your program. Your program normally stops because there is some kind of an error occurs in your program. And then what? The exception, the class will take control of your program and it will throw the object of that class and then it will terminate your program. So then what? What is the solution? How you will handle? The solution is you should have to handle that exception. So exception handling is an approach through which you can handle the runtime errors. Runtime error means when your program is running. And what are those exceptions? For example, in your program, an error or an exception with this name, class not found exception. C is capital, N is capital, F is capital, E is capital. This is the reserved word. So class not found exception. This is a subclass of this exception class. This class not found exception is a subclass, or you can say the child class of this parent class exception. So if in your program you are doing something with the filing, and if your program is not able to find the file, then it will, or if you are trying to access some class which is not existing, then you will see this exception, then you will see this event, then you will see this exception error with this name, class not found exception. There are also other names, input output exception, IO exception, input output exception. If there is something wrong with the input and the output of your program. SQL exception, if you are handling database in your program, then you will see this SQL exception. And similarly, remote exception, this is related to networks. If you are accessing your program remotely on a network, then you will have this remote exception, etc. And there are many others. You will see, I will show you a diagram, this one, and then I will explain all these one. So if there is any kind of exception in your program like this, as we mentioned some of the examples here, these are the examples of the exceptions. So if some of these exceptions are occurring in your program, then your program will not complete, then your program will not executed completely. Then you have to handle that exception. You have to handle that, and you can handle that exception in your source code. In your source code. And when you will handle, then your program or your application will run normally, and then its execution will be completed. For example, and what is the effect of exception handling? See it. If exception occurs, what will happen in your program? See the effect. And if you will handle that exception, what will be the effect? You will see. For example, this is the program. This is not the exact program, but this is just an example. And here, for example, in your program, you have these 10 statements. And for example, at statement number 5, some exception error is occurring. I am saying error again and again, otherwise this is not the right word for this. The right word is exception. But for your understanding, I am saying exception error. But after one or two more slides, then I will keep on saying exception only. And then you will have the understanding that exception is some kind of an event which is identifying the error in our program. And that error is causing our program to stop. So anyhow, if in statement 5, there is some kind of thing which is generating an exception, then what will have happened when you will run your program? Statement 1 will execute, 2 will execute, 3 will execute, 4 will execute, and here at 5, if there is an exception, then exception will be generated. And here, the control of your program will be stopped here. Your program will stop here at 5. You will see the outputs until statement 4. You will not see anything of this statement 5. And after that statement 5, your program will come out of The control will come out of your program, and maybe it will go to the editor of your program, and you will the running of your program will be stopped. The running of your program will be stopped. And then you will again seeing your source code that there is something wrong with my source code. You will see that message. But if you will handle that exception here at statement 5, now the other scenario, if you will handle the exception here at statement 5, then what will happen? That exception will be generated here. It will be corrected or handled here at statement 5. You will see the output of the statement 5, and then the next statement will be executed, and your program will go on normally, and you will see all the outputs if you handled the exception. But if you didn't handle the exception, then the control of your program will come out of this program, and you will not see anything related to statement 6 to 10. So this is basically the effect of exception handling, which you have seen here. Now, so there is a class in Java. The name of that class is throwable. The name of that class is throwable. And that class contains two subclasses, the exception and the error. Exception and the error. So if I say what is the hierarchy of the exception classes, then this is the diagram. This is the hierarchy of the exception classes. So for example, this after exception, this exception, which is the subclass of this throwable, or which is the child class of this throwable, this exception class contains further classes. And in these classes, this runtime exception contains further classes, further child classes. And this index out of bound exception contains further child classes. So now you can understand that this exception class, which is available in Java, will have the IO exception, which is for the input and output. If in your program there is something with the input and output, for example, system.out.println is output command. And similarly, scanner that you use is the input command. If there is something wrong with the input and output, then you will see a exception message from this class. Similarly, if you have the database and there is something wrong with the connection of the database, or something wrong if you are retrieving entries from the database, or something wrong with your SQL query, then you will see some exception message from your program will stop, and then you will see some exception message from this SQL exception, which is the child class of this exception class. Similarly, class not found, I already explained that if your program is not able to find the file which you want to handle, or in which you want to do something, if you are handling file in your programs, maybe you are opening a text file by your program, and if that text file is not existing, or something is wrong with your file, then your program is not able to open that file. So then you can see exception message from this class not found exception. Or if you are not, that can be a class, that can be a text file, audio file, video file, whatever. Then you have another class that is called runtime exception. So that runtime exception have further child classes, which is arithmetic exception. If there is something wrong in your program related to calculation, for example, addition, subtraction, division, or whatever, then you will see some exception message related to arithmetic exception. And this is the class, subclass of this runtime exception. Null pointer exception. If the value of some variable is null and you are using that variable again somewhere, then that variable can cause this exception. Number format exception. If you are using some variable with some data type which is not suitable for other variable because the other variable has some other data type or whatever, then you can see an exception message, number format exception from this class. Similarly, index out of bound exception. When some variable has the limit and that limit, you are crossing that limit. For example, an array, and that index out of bound has two subclasses, array index out of bound and string index out of bound. So for example, if you have the array and the size of the array is 10, but you are going to insert an element in that array at position 11th or 12th, which is not the size of the array, then you will see this message, array index out of bound. Array index out of bound. You are beyond the limit of that array. You are beyond the maximum size of the array. String index out of bound exception. String is also an array, but it contains characters, you can say, or it contains words. So again, if string has a size, and if you are putting some character or word into it beyond its limit, then you will see this exception message. And on the right hand side, you have this class error. And you have this class error. So this error class has 3 errors. These are not exceptions, okay? These are not, literally, these are not exceptions. These are the errors. And in Java, for example, this class, which has the further child classes, stack overflow error, virtual machine error, out of memory error. If any of these error will appear in your program, then you cannot handle. Then you cannot handle those errors in your program. You must have to, your program will be terminated. You must have to apply some big changes in your program. Maybe you have to, for example, stack overflow error. So when your program is running behind the scene, the compiler is using the stack for the execution of your program. And you know that for that stack, it is putting some values into the stack and then popping it out. So then if there is something wrong, then that stack is not visible to you. So then what? Your program needs some big changes. Maybe you have to change the data structure. If you are using array, maybe you have to use some linked list or some other approach. You have to apply the changes in the design of your program. Then you can get rid of these errors. And virtual machine error, this is the Java virtual machine, which is executing your program, not your program. These are not related to your program actually. Your program is only becoming a reason for these errors. But these errors, if you want to solve them, you cannot solve them like exception handling. No. You cannot handle something. You can just let minor changes in the source code and then you can remove those errors. No. You have to apply the big changes. Anyhow, so this is not exceptions. These are not exceptions. You don't have any solution for them. If you want to solve them, then you have to apply the major design changes in your program. But on the left-hand side, this exception class, whatever it will contain, these are the exceptions, and you can handle them in your source code easily. And this whole diagram is called the exception class hierarchy. So now there are 2 types of exceptions normally. One is checked, other is unchecked. And error, which you have seen here, by the way, it is not exception, but you can include them into the exception, just for understanding. But you cannot handle these errors like these exception handling. So that's why that is something a separate. But there are mainly two things, checked and unchecked. So exception handling, you have the checked exceptions, unchecked exceptions, and errors according to this diagram. And this one, what is checked exceptions? For example, difference between checked and unchecked. So what is checked exceptions? Here in this diagram, under this exception class, these classes which you are seeing, these one, IO exception, SQL exception, class not found exception, these are called checked exception. These are called checked exception. Why? Because we can handle them in our program at compile time. Compile time is the first step after writing your whole program. When you normally in editors, when you click on the run button, the first step is compilation, the second step is running of your program. Running of your program. So compiler, in compilation, during the first step, during the compilation, the compiler will read your program and it will generate another file for your program. If the name of your program is first.java, then during compilation, it will create another file with name first.class. First.class. And that file will be created during the first step, that is called compilation. And after that, if the compilation will be successful, then the second step, which is the running of your program, that will be executed. And then you can see the output of your program. And during the first step, which is called compilation, and in which the first.class file will be generated, your compiler will read your program and it will identify all the variables and classes which are existing in your class. And it will check the syntax also that everything is okay. And then it will generate that. If some default constructor is not available, then in the first.class file, it will be available automatically. So these three, input output exception, SQL exception, class not found exception, these are called the checked exceptions. So you can handle them before the running of your program, before the running of your program. And these four, arithmetic, null pointer, number format, these three, and these two, array index out of bound, string index out of bound. So these three and these two, these are lying in the category of unchecked exceptions. And what is unchecked exception? Exceptions which you can handle at runtime, not compile time. Not compile time. When your program is running at that time, you can handle them. You can handle them. So arithmetic, null pointer, number format, array index, string index. So these five are called unchecked exceptions. Walaikum assalam. So checked exception is what? The classes that directly inherit the throwable class except runtime exception. So under the throwable class, except this runtime and all these are the three. These are the three. These are called here except runtime exception and error. So you have to exclude runtime exception and also and error. So error and runtime exception class is not in this category. And then we have only three classes. So those are called checked exceptions. And here the examples are written: input output exception, SQL, and class not found. And you can, these checked exceptions are checked at compile time. And similarly for unchecked exception, classes that inherit the runtime exception class. And what inherit the runtime? These one. This is the runtime exception, and these one. And this index out of bound have further two child classes. So 3 plus 2, 5. And their names, their examples, arithmetic are written there, and we can check them at runtime. And error is what? I already told you. Error is irrecoverable. You cannot recover this error in your program at runtime. At runtime, you cannot recover. And those are the three errors: out of memory, stack overflow, virtual machine. And if these errors will happen, you have to apply the major changes in the design of your program. These errors you cannot remove by applying the same mechanism that you will do with the exception handling. Okay, we will move on now. Slowly, what is exception handling, we will see. So now we have this slide, exception, Java exception keywords. If we want to learn that how we can handle the Java exception, then we must have to get knowledge about these 5 keywords. What is this try? What is this catch? What is this finally? What is this throw? What is this throws? What are these? We have to get knowledge about these 5 keywords and how we can use them. And then you will have the knowledge about Java exception, and then you can handle the Java exceptions in your program. So what is try block? So I already told you that it is a block. So anyhow, so what is try? So this try is block. Normally in programming, block means that it would be a collection of some statements within the parentheses. Within, not parentheses, within the curly brackets. Within the curly brackets. Parentheses is like that, starting bracket, ending bracket. And curly square brackets is like that, and curly is in between. Then you have like that. I cannot make a shape with my hands. So anyhow, so what is try? So try is a block basically. So you have to specify, you have to write that block. You have to specify, or you have to write that. I'm using a simple word, write, so that you can understand. So you have to write that block. If you have a belief that on that statement of your program, an exception can occur. If you have a belief, if you are a programmer, then you will have that belief. If you are not a programmer, then you will not know at which statement you will have that exception. But if you are a programmer, then with your practice, you will get this knowledge that on which statement of your program you will have that exception can occur. You will have that possibility in your mind that here the exception can occur on this statement. When you have this situation in your mind, what you have to do? You have to put that statement in the try block. In the try block. In the try block. Because now, so the statement are the source code which you are expecting that it will generate an exception. You have to put that source code, that statement, or more than 2 statements, whatever it is, you have to put those statements in that try block. And you will see what is the syntax of the try block, you will see next. And after the try block, and what try block will do when exception will occur in that try block? The try block will throw an object of that exception. It will throw that object. And then there would be some other block that will catch that object in your program. So the try block must be followed by either catch or finally block. There are 2 other blocks. One is called catch, other is called finally, which you can see here. So after the try block, you can introduce or you can write the catch block or the finally block. You can write them. Catch block is what? Catch block is used to catch the exception which was thrown by the try block. Which was thrown by the try block. The exception error which was thrown by the try block Catch block is the, you can say, is the candidate who will responsible to catch that exception, to catch and then handle, to catch and then correct that error. Catch block. And finally, block is something which you can introduce in your program if exception will occur or not. This finally block you can introduce after the catch block, or if you have the program, then you will have the try catch blocks in your program, and at the end you can write the finally block. So finally block will be a block in which you can write that type of source code which you want to execute at any condition. You want that either you have the error in my program or not, either I have the exception in my program or not. I want to execute these statements at all costs. Then you have to put those statements in the finally block, in the finally blocks. And those statements will be executed at any cost. Either the exception will occur in your program or not. These statements which you will write in this finally block, those will be executed. So catch block is what? You know that catch block is used to handle the exception which is occurring in the try block. So if you are going to write catch block only, no, it is false. You have to write try block before the catch block. And then catch block is used to catch that object which will be thrown by the try block. And catch block can be followed by a finally block later. So if you have the finally block before the catch block, that is okay. That is okay, no issue. And what is finally block? Finally block is used to execute the necessary code. The source code which you want to execute compulsory, necessary, you have to put that code in the finally block. So now what will happen? If exception is handled or not, that code that you will write it in the finally block, that will be executed. But from our previous knowledge, you know that when exception occur, program stopped at that statement and it will not execute anything else. It will not execute anything else. But if you have the finally block in your program, whatever you will write in that, exception occurs or not, that will be executed. You will see the difference. We will see the examples of each one in detail in the next slide. And throw is a keyword which sometimes you want to throw exception in your program by yourself. You want to throw the exception in your program sometime. If you want to do this thing, then you can use this keyword throw to throw any exception. Maybe you can write a program and in which you are throwing some exception. You want to test your colleague, you want to test your friend that either he can handle that or not, and then you will give that program to him to remove that exception, and you are throwing that exception by yourself in your code. Your code is not throwing anything, but you are throwing that exception by yourself. If you want to throw that exception explicitly, then you can use this keyword for this purpose. And then there is a keyword throws. So throw is a keyword to throw an exception event. And throws, this is the keyword, but this will not throw any exception. This keyword you can use with any method. If you have a doubt that in this method an exception can occur, then you can use this keyword throws in the signature of the method, and that would be an alert for that method that exception can occur in that method. That would be only an alert, only a warning. For the programmer, not for the compiler even, not for the JVM, for the programmer, that here exception can occur. If you want to highlight some method on which you have a doubt that exception can occur, then you can write this word there and with the name of the method or with the name of the exception. And it would be only an alert. Either that method will generate an exception or not, no issue, but it is an alert for the programmer that this is doubted. This is doubted. So throws keyword, we normally used this keyword to declare exception. So declare doesn't mean that it will happen. It can happen or not. So it will not throw any exception. It will only specify, we only write this keyword that any exception can occur in the method. And you have to use with the signature. You will see its syntactical example in the upcoming slides. Now, we have this small Java exception handling example using a try catch statement, using a try and catch block. Try block alone is not needed because it is only throwing an exception. It is only throwing an object. It is not handling. Catch is a block which can handle, which can catch the object and handle the exception. So that's why whenever there is a try, then you will have the catch block. So that's why logically, when you will have the try, then you must have the catch block. So for example, here we have this simple example, public class. This is the name of the class, Java exception example, starting bracket, and this is the ending bracket. And then you have the main method, starting bracket, and the ending method. And in this main method, because main is the method which will execute, in this main method, you have this try block. So this is the syntax, how you can write it, try, T with small, okay, small letter, try, starting bracket, ending bracket. So this is called block. This is called try block. The name and the curly brackets, this is called try block. And here in this try block, if you have a doubt on any statement of your program that statement can generate an exception, you have to put that statement into the try block. So that's why you can see it here, some statement, which is what int data is equal to 100 divided by 0. So you know that divide by 0 is an error in computer. In computers, it is an error. You cannot divide any number with 0. So here you have that exception. So we have a belief that this is wrong, but suppose, for example, you want to check it, but this statement is, so this is a wrong, this is a false statement in programming. You cannot divide any number with 0. So this statement is doing what? This is generating an exception. And this is related to division, and division lies in which category? Arithmetic exception. Which category? This one, arithmetic exception. This one. So this is generating an exception, an arithmetic exception. So what will happen then? If you have this code, this statement is producing arithmetic exception. So object of arithmetic exception will be thrown at this statement by the try block, and the control will come out of this try block, and it will search after the try block, after the bracket of the try block, it will search for the catch block. It will search for the related catch block. And we are going to write the related catch block. So then that's the reason that we are now writing the catch block. And here you have the catch block, and it is a kind of a method. Catch, parenthesis started, parenthesis ended, curly bracket starts, curly brackets end. This is the syntactical structure without any statement. So if you want to write catch, the name of the catch block, here you can write the data type of the exception class actually. And then you have to use some object of that class, any name. Object is E is the name for the object. So I am saying that I am sure, being a programmer, I'm sure that here we have the arithmetic exception. And what is the word for arithmetic exception? A capital, E capital. So you have to keep this in your mind. Arithmetic exception. So then how you can write that? Arithmetic exception. Write the name of that class, arithmetic exception, and then write any name for the object of this class. So here you can write num1, num2, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, whatever, because this is the name for the object of this class. And how you identify that you have to write this name? Because here you have that exception, arithmetic. So that's why we are writing arithmetic exception and the object. And then in this catch block, in this catch method, you can say, because it is a method from this parenthesis and we are passing arguments into it. So this is a method. It is more than a block. Try normally don't take any arguments. So that's why I'm calling it a block. And this catch, I can call it a block because it's try, catch, coming together always. But basically it is a method because it is taking arguments. And then here you can write any number of any statement you can write. So now whatever the error, whatever the object, which is what type of object thrown here from this statement, 100 divided by 0, arithmetic exception object of the arithmetic exception. So that object will be thrown here. And then we will come out of this try block and we will search for the compiler will search for the catch block. What I am saying according to the compiler. It will search for the catch block. It will find the catch block here and then it will see what is the type of the exception class, because he has what type? He has arithmetic exception. So he will see that it is arithmetic exception is written there. So it is now matched. And when it is matched, it will copy that exception message which was thrown by the try block into this object E, into this variable, which is basically an object. It will copy that error message into this E. And now what you have to do? You have to print that error message, nothing else. Nothing else. So that's why we have system.out.println command here, and we are just writing that object. And whatever the things will be in it, that will be printed on your black screen or in your output screen. So now what? Try and catch block. Here the exception is thrown, and here you have in catch block, you have handled that exception. So now your program will not terminate abnormally. When you don't have the catch block in your program, then here the exception will be thrown out. Your program will search for the catch block. It is not there. So now it will terminate here. It will be terminated here abnormally, and the control will go to the editor, and you will not see anything next. But if you have that exception here, then the exception message will be thrown out of here. It will find the catch. It will print that error message. And then the control will go to the next statement, whatever it is. And it is written here system.out.println rest of the code. And then this will be printed. So now here in the output, when arithmetic exception system.out.println E, whatever the E will have, it will be printed on your screen. You can see this is the message. Exception in thread main, because we are in the main method. This try block is where? In the main method. So exception in thread main. And what is the exception name? java.lang.arithmetic exception. It is saying that this arithmetic exception is a class which is existing in this lang folder. And this lang folder is existing in this Java folder. So it is showing the complete path. And then after colon, it is giving that what kind of that exception is. What is the message for that error exception? Divide by 0. So you are dividing something there on that statement with 0, which is an error. which is an error. So this message is giving you an idea that how you can correct it. So we have not corrected it in this program, but we are just catching it and then displaying it, that exception. We are just displaying that. And after that, and it will go here, and the rest of the code will be printed. The rest of the code will be printed. This is the simple execution. This is, and it will become complicated and complicated. Yes. Why? You have the exam or what? Your class or whatever. Okay. So time is almost finished. So I am just okay. I will start next from here. So I am stopping.